In this episode, we will hear about the catastrophe that was about to hit Athens and the last speech of Pericles. To understand why Pericles stood before the Athenian assembly in the summer of 430 BC for the last time, we need to go back to the decision that set everything in motion. In our previous episode, we covered the first Spartan invasion of Attica, the land around Athens itself. It came in the spring of 431 BC, after the Athenians rejected a Spartan ultimatum. The Spartan king led the Peloponnesian forces deep into Attica, cutting down trees, burning grain stores, ravaging the countryside. All this while Athenian farmers streamed through the city gates as refugees. And a short note on the geography of Athens. During this time, the city of Athens was situated on a hill about 7 to 8 kilometers inland and did not directly reach the coast. However, its vital port, Pericles, lay directly to the southwest and operated as a prominent city in its own right. To secure this crucial connection, the Athenians constructed a massive fortification system known as the Long Walls. Rather than just encircling the urban core, these walls extended all the way to the coast. It is within these fortifications that the refugees stayed. Thucydides tells us that the scene was wretched. People who had farmed the same land for generations, who had roots and altars and graves in the rural districts, were now refugees in their own city. They crowded into Athens in numbers the city was never built to handle. The population within the walls swelled dramatically, and into this compression, this density of human bodies under stress, came something no general had planned for: the plague. Rumors started spreading, saying that the Peloponnesians had poisoned the water reservoirs in the port of Athens, since people started falling ill. Due to the refugees, Athens was severely overcrowded. Refugees from across Attica had flooded behind the Long Walls, tripling or even quadrupling the city's pre-war population of around 100 to 150,000 people to somewhere between 300 to 400,000. Imagine if the population of your home city was quadrupled. Well, in Athens, this led to bodies being packed together in conditions the city had never been designed to sustain. Into that population came a pestilence unlike anything in living memory. Thucydides contracted it himself and survived, which is why his account is so precise and so harrowing. The symptoms he describes were burning fever, coughing, vomiting, ulcers spreading across the body. The afflicted felt so unbearably hot, they could not bear even the thinnest garment against their skin. They were seized by such extreme thirst that they threw themselves into water cisterns and wells. Convulsions were common while madness was not. And as death reaped its many victims, something else began to break down alongside the bodies. Thucydides observed that the plague did what prolonged suffering threatens to do. It dissolved the social fabric. The law could not protect them from the calamity or dissuade people from taking advantage of the chaos. People stopped fearing the laws. Men who had always been cautious began doing openly what they once had only done in secret. Inheritances from the dead were spent without thought for the future, and people lived as though each day might be their last. And for many, it was. With the plague, respect for the gods faded, respect for the law faded, and disorder began to rule. Death reigned within the walls. Devastation continued outside the walls. For the Athenians, not holding modern medical knowledge to understand the cause and spread of the plague, it must have seemed like the apocalypse. Could Athens withstand the dual pressure of war and pestilence? And could Pericles' strategy, which demanded restraint and patience, be carried out when all seemed to fall apart anyway? The Athenians didn't know, but had to live with the uncertainty and find out. The next campaigning season, the Spartans invaded again. Pericles still refused to march out to meet them. He held firm not to let the Spartans exploit an Athenian mistake. But with this decision, the patience and the resolve of the population was hemorrhaging, and desperation followed. So besieged from without and rotting from within, they began to turn on themselves. The people began to find fault with Pericles. As the general that proposed the war, the architect of the strategy, and he was now seen as the cause of all their misfortunes. Citizens sent ambassadors to Sparta seeking terms, but the ambassadors returned with nothing. And all the grief and fury of the city turned, with nowhere else to go, onto the man who had led them to this situation. Here we need to pause and understand how completely Pericles' position had been reversed. A year earlier, he had stood before the Athenian assembly as the most trusted man in the city. And in the Funeral Oration of 431 BC, he had articulated a vision of Athens that transcended military calculation. Athens was not merely a city at war, she was an education to all of Greece. And the men being mourned there were not casualties, they were contributors to something that would outlast all of them. That speech had worked. The city had believed him. The strategy had held through 1 full year of Spartan invasions and 1 full year of hardship. Then the plague arrived, and the calculation broke down entirely. The plague did not spare the powerful. Pericles' own family was devastated. 2 of his sons died in the epidemic, his sister died, friends and close associates died too, but Athens was not in a mood for sympathy. They wanted someone to blame. The people who had trusted his strategy and abandoned their farms, who had watched the Spartans tear apart their world, who had buried children and parents in mass graves. They had endured it because they believed. Now, after the Spartan invasion of their land, the plague raging and no sign of peace, they wanted the man who had told them to be patient to answer for it. There were those who argued, not without reason, that the cost of continuing the war was greater than any strategic gain. Pericles, who had always opposed appeasement, was no longer simply being cautious. He was beginning to look like the architect of a disaster. So it was in this atmosphere, the city ravaged by plague, furious at its own suffering, that Pericles called an assembly. He had a double objective, both restoring confidence and of leading the angry citizens to a calm and more hopeful state. He came forward to speak to the assembly.
I was not unprepared for the anger of which I have been made the target, because I know its causes. I have now called an assembly for the purpose of reminding you of certain points, and of objecting against you being unreasonably irritated with me, or intimidated by your own sufferings. I am of the opinion that national greatness benefits private citizens more than any individual greatness in combination with public humiliation. A man may be ever so well off personally, yet if his country is ruined, he must be ruined with it. Whereas a flourishing commonwealth always affords a chance of salvation to unfortunate individuals. Since a nation can support the burdens of its citizens, but individual citizens cannot carry the burdens of a failing nation, it is surely the duty of everyone to step forward in the nation's defense. You should not be so overwhelmed by your personal afflictions as to give up all thoughts of the common safety, and to blame me for having counseled war, or blame yourselves for having voted for it. And yet, if you are angry with me, you are angry with someone who, I believe, is second to no man either in knowledge or in proper policy, or in the ability to explain it, and who is, moreover, not only a patriot, but an honest one. A man possessing the right knowledge without the ability to explain it might as well have no idea on the matter at all, even if he had both these gifts, but no love for his country. He would only be a cold advocate for its interests, while if his patriotism could be bought with bribes, everything would go for a price. So if you thought that I possessed these qualities, even to a moderate degree, when you took my advice and went to war, there is currently no reason now why I should be accused of having done wrong. Of course, for those who have a free choice in the matter, and whose fortunes are not at stake, war is indeed the greatest of follies. But if the only choice was between submission with loss of independence and danger with the hope of preserving it, then it is the one who refuses to accept the risk who deserves the blame, not the one who faces it. I am the same man, and do not change. It is you who change. The truth is, you took my advice when you were unhurt, only to regret it when misfortune arrived. The apparent failure of my policy lies only in the wavering of your resolution, since the suffering it brings is being felt by everyone among you, while its advantages are still distant and obscure. And now that a great and sudden setback has befallen you, your minds are too broken to hold fast to your original resolve. When encountering what is sudden, unexpected, and completely outside of calculation, the spirit quails. And putting all else aside, the plague has certainly been an emergency of this kind. Yet born, as you are, citizens of a great state, and brought up, as you have been, with traditions equal to your birth, you should be ready to face the greatest disasters and still keep the shining brilliance of your name unimpaired. For the judgment of mankind is just as relentless towards the weakness that falls short of a recognized reputation, as it is jealous of the arrogance that aspires higher than its due. Cease then to grieve for your private afflictions, and address yourselves instead to the safety of the Commonwealth. If you shrink before the efforts which the war makes necessary, and fear that after all they may not lead to a happy outcome, you already know the reasons by which I have often demonstrated to you the groundlessness of your hesitations. But if those reasons are not enough, I will now reveal an advantage arising from the greatness of your empire, one which I think you have never yet considered, which I never mentioned in my previous speeches, and which sounds so bold that I would scarcely venture it now, were it not for the unnatural despair that I now see around me. You perhaps think that your empire extends only over your allies, but I will declare to you the truth. The visible field of action is divided in two parts, land and sea. In the whole of one of these, namely the sea, you are completely supreme, not merely as far as you use it now, but also for whatever further extent you may use it for in the future. In fact, your navy is so powerful that your vessels may go wherever they please, and no king or nation on earth can stop them. So, although you may think it a great hardship to lose your land and houses, you must see that this naval power of yours is something widely different. Instead of worrying about your property, you should only view your houses and fields as small gardens or decorations that go along with great wealth, and in comparison to naval power, are of little importance. You must understand that liberty preserved by your efforts will easily recover what we have lost, But if you bend the knee, even what you still have will be taken from you. Your fathers did not receive these possessions from others, but from their own efforts. They did not let that which their labor had acquired slip away, but delivered them safe to you. In this respect, at least, you must prove yourselves their equals, remembering that to lose what one already has is more disgraceful than to fail in getting it. Therefore, you must confront your enemies not merely with spirit, but with disdain. Confidence, indeed, a blissful ignorance can inspire, even to a coward's heart. But disdain is a privilege reserved for those who, like us, have been assured by reason that they are superior to their enemy. And when the chances of war are equal, this knowledge fortifies courage through the contempt it creates. Its trust is placed not in blind hope, which is merely the crutch of the desperate, but in a judgment grounded in actual resources, whose calculations are far more to be depended upon. Besides, to recede is no longer possible, even if some of you, in the fear of the moment, fancied the idea of playing the honest, peaceful citizen. To speak plainly, the empire you now hold is a tyranny. Taking it may have been wrong, but letting it go is purely dangerous. If men with these peaceful, passive views convince others, they would quickly ruin a nation. Indeed, the result would be the same if they lived isolated by themselves. For the passive and unambitious are never secure without vigorous protectors at their side. In short, such qualities are useless to an imperial city, though they may help a subject city to enjoy a quiet servitude. Therefore, hear me when I say you must not be seduced by citizens like these, or be angry with me, who, when I voted for war, only did what you did yourselves. The enemy invaded your country and did exactly what you knew they would do when you refused to comply with their demands. And on top of everything we expected, the plague has come upon us. The only point, indeed, where our calculations failed. It is this, I know, that is largely responsible for making me unpopular. Quite undeservedly, unless you are also prepared to give me credit for any unexpected success that chance may bring you. Besides, the hand of heaven must be borne with resignation, but that of the enemy with fortitude. This was always the old way in Athens, so do not prevent it from being so still. Remember, too, that if your country has the greatest name in the world, it is because it never bent before disaster, because it has expended more life and effort in war than any other city, and has won for itself a power greater than any hitherto known, the memory of which will descend to the last generation. Even if now, in obedience to the general state of decay, we should ever be forced to yield, we will still be remembered that we held rule over more Greeks than any other Greek state, and that we sustained the greatest wars against Greece's united and separate powers, and inhabited a city unrivaled by any other in resources or magnitude. These glories may be criticized by the slow and unambitious, but in the hearts of the energetic they will awaken emulation, and in those who lack them, an envious regret. Everyone who rules others will eventually be hated and unpopular, but a wise leader accepts that hatred, knowing it is the price of achieving great things. Hate fades quickly, but the brilliance of what we build today and our glory tomorrow will never be forgotten. Make your decision, therefore, for future glory then, and honor now, and attain both through instant and zealous effort. Do not send heralds to Sparta, and do not show any signs of being broken by your current sufferings. since they whose minds are least sensitive to calamity, and whose hands are quickest to face it, are the greatest citizens and the greatest nations.
In the end, Pericles' speech succeeded in rallying the Athenians. But he was fined. Thucydides records an amount somewhere between 15 and 50 talents. Significant, though modest for a man of his standing. And then within the year, he was also re-elected as general. The assembly had allowed itself to be led back from the edge by the one man who did not seem blinded with despair. The arguments of his speech are worth examining closely, because what Pericles is doing beneath the surface is more unsettling than it first appears. When the Athenians began looking for a way out, sending ambassadors to Sparta and entertaining the idea of a negotiated peace, Pericles' response was not simply to rally their courage, it was to close off the alternatives. You present the alternatives not as difficult choices, but as non-choices, as folly or impossibility. War therefore becomes not something Athens is choosing, but something it cannot avoid, and the burden of justification shifts quietly from the path Pericles is advocating to the path he is dismissing. His concrete argument runs like this: to stop fighting would mean defeat. Defeat would mean the dissolution of the empire, because Athens' subjects would no longer fear its power or its punishment. And once the empire dissolved, Athens would be exposed to the revenge of every people it had subjugated. Peace, paradoxically, was the more dangerous option. This led Pericles to a remarkably frank admission. He tells the assembly plainly, "What you hold is a tyranny." He is not defending the empire as just. He is saying that Athens has long since passed the point where virtue was a viable foreign policy. The city is locked into overlordship, not entirely by choice anymore, but by the accumulated weight of what it had already done. To stop would be to invite the revenge of everyone it had wronged. It is a pattern that recurs throughout history, powers that cannot retreat because they have become prisoners of their own past crimes, compelled to press forward long after the original purpose has been forgotten. This is very interesting, and scholars have noted the tension this creates with the Funeral Oration delivered just 1 year earlier. Donald Kagan observes that the two speeches together reveal the full complexity of Pericles' vision. Athens was both a model of democracy and a coercive imperial power. And Pericles saw no contradiction in that. The wealth of empire was precisely what made the Athenian way of life possible. Another scholar goes further, arguing that this speech marks a turning point in the Athenian self-understanding, the moment when the city's leadership openly acknowledged the gap between its democratic self-image and its imperial reality. So what Pericles offered the assembly that day was not comfort, but lucidity, not reassurance about what Athens had done, but clarity about what it now had to do. The path forward was the only path available, and the man best placed to walk it, as he reminded them, was himself. But what those listening could not have known was that it was for the last time they would hear him say so. When Pericles stepped down from the podium, he had given his final speech. The plague took him in the autumn of 429 BC. How would this loss affect the Athenian resolve and the Athenian strategy for the war? The plague of Athens, in my opinion, is the single most defining event of the war. It would, as we later in this series will see, lead both directly and indirectly to many future catastrophes for the Athenians. But given the importance the plague had on history, we know surprisingly little about it. Scholars have debated for a long time what the plague of Athens was. Some have thought that it was bubonic plague, but others have also suggested typhus, measles, smallpox, or even Ebola. But the mystery took an exciting turn in the mid-2000s, when scientists dug up an ancient mass grave in Athens dating back to the time of the plague. And by testing DNA from the teeth of the skeletons, researchers found traces of the bacteria that causes typhoid fever. And for a moment it seemed like the ancient cold case was finally solved. But other experts pointed out that ancient DNA is fragile and easily contaminated after thousands of years in the dirt. Because of this, scientists are still arguing, but it seems like the leading candidate is typhoid fever. What is not disputed, and what is very clear, is the scale of devastation that the plague caused. Estimates suggest as many as 100,000 people died, possibly a quarter or even a third of the entire population of Attica, and its most senior and influential politician died with them. When Pericles died of the plague, an era of restraint and visionary leadership died with him. Athens stood without him in the middle of a war that he had supported, and he had been the architect of the strategy for that war. With his death, different types of men were waiting to take his place. Pericles had ruled by raising citizens to his own level. Many of his successors would descend to their darkest desires. The time of sound, thoughtful, and comparably benevolent leadership of Athens was over. Politicians of a more ambitious and selfish breed now had space to step forward. One of these politicians was Cleon, a tanner by trade, and a demagogue by vocation. And by the account of many ancient sources we have, Thucydides, Aristophanes, and Plutarch, he was the most dangerous kind of political animal. We will hear Cleon's voice soon enough, and when we do, the distance from Pericles will be unmistakable. So with Pericles dead, the war was about to change, from a struggle for survival into something uglier, a contest over who could be the most ruthless. Next time, we enter a new chapter of the Peloponnesian War, the world after Pericles. We are going to cover the Mytilenean debate, which illustrates this contrast. The assembly that Pericles had once commanded with calm precision would soon vote out of rage to execute every adult male in a city that had surrendered to them. And then, overnight, vote again. Hear the next episode and see what happens to the Athenian leadership after Pericles.